Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and this is my recap and review of Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man #1. So, we're going to do things a little differently. This comic didn't really feel like it had a spot that I could easily segment out for kind of doing the new narration bits, and I kind of wanted to talk about the issue as a whole. So I'm going to do kind of this quick recap on camera, as opposed to the usual thing with scripts and all that, and just give my thoughts on the comic in general. And it's pretty good. So we start off, and it's kind of, we're just doing the basic origin stuff. It goes into how Peter Parker was bitten and became Spider-Man, and my first thought was, oh god, like we're covering this again. And on the next page, the Human Torch basically goes, okay, I know this, I know your origin story, like what are you doing? So it's self-referential, but it does serve an important purpose later, so it's all good. I didn't really know what to think of this comic going into it. I mean, Spider-Man's been a bit of a mess lately, and I haven't made my opinion of that unclear, to say the least. But it said it was doing a new back to basics. The X-Men have kind of done a good job at revamping things, like when they had the whole resurrection thing a couple months ago, so maybe there's some chance to all this. And you know, I have to say I was impressed. We open with Spider-Man and the Human Torch having a lunch together on a little window ledge. And it's a touching little moment where Peter's like going through how he's been having a rough time lately and stuff, and they basically share a hug together and agree to go watch a movie later. It's a really touching little moment and is the best thing about this comic, Peter interacting with more superheroes and having these more humane moments. So then Peter swings off and he goes patrolling the streets of New York, and he even kind of says to himself like, oh, this was great, it's great to be going back and doing these things. He encounters a mugging, as Spider-Man is to do, and he attempts to stop it, only for Ant-Man to appear and kind of beat him to the punch. Nevertheless, the woman being mugged, Rebecca, is really impressed, and she's not so much reacting with shock or fear, she's just kind of like surprised and is more starstruck with like the superhero thing than anything else. So she ends up giving Spider-Man her business card and asking him out. So obviously she's going to be the new romantic interest, and while that is a bit of a forced and heavy-handed introduction for her, she's an interesting character, and I kind of like the twist of her meeting Peter as Spider-Man and her presumably going to get to know him through that persona as opposed to Peter Parker. Where that goes from here, I don't know, but that was pretty interesting. So she's not in the comic much, so it's hard to say where they're going to go from here, but she's a solid start. Peter then finds a cell phone, and it's a Stark phone, so it shouldn't be hackable, but it has a different operating system, and it's this old phone, so Peter just finds that really weird and suspicious. And so with Ant-Man, they agree to look into this, and Scott Lang takes him to a lab run by the Tinkerer's brother. They're pretty interesting. They have a whole little setup there. I think Sam Wilson shows up, and there's this kid Uatu kind of helping out, and the Tinkerer's brother himself is a really interesting guy, and he's this big giant dude, and he's got all this cool tech around, and he even notices that Peter's web slinger is kind of acting up and agrees to take a look at it for him. So he actually manages to tweak it and fixes whatever the problem was, and so Peter's kind of like, he's kind of an impressive character. He even has a great line because of that. He's like, oh, don't worry, Spider-Man, like when you grow up to be my age, you would have been able to figure this out yourself. So he's a really nice guy, and it's just a solid little character moment. Again, this comic's just full of those. It's really good in that regard. They're able to trace the origins of the phone to this house, so Peter goes to investigate. On the way, he asks Rebecca out, and they agree to have a date. And meanwhile, Johnny Storm arrives at Peter's house, but Spider-Man has forgotten that they set up this movie thing. So while Peter goes to investigate, he comes upon the house, and he's attacked by this dude who's in an Iron Man suit. Meanwhile, back at the Parker home, Johnny Storm's like sitting on his phone trying to figure out what's going on and grumbling about like Parker missing their appointment and stuff. And a woman overhears him who's at Peter's door, and she says, oh, you know Peter? I'm his sister. And that's where the comic ends. So yeah, it's a big ending and a really strong first issue for the new Spider-Man series overall. I love the art here. Adam Kubert does the art, and Jordi Belair did the colors, and they both did a phenomenal job. Belair's colors really pop and give this comic a great feeling of life, while Kubert kind of goes for a more cartoonish style most of the time, like especially when Spider-Man's just running around in costume. But every once in a while, in certain panels, he throws in a lot of detail, especially like around facial expressions or like just people in civvy clothes. He does a really good job with that. And I actually really dug his art throughout this entire issue. And overall, it's just a perfect Spider-Man comic in that regard. Like we are going back to the basic good parts of Spider-Man with like a focus on tech, on other superheroes and Spider-Man's interactions with them, and more importantly than anything, these human moments, these fun little interactions between characters and these little endearing bits. There's a lot of humor in this comic that I didn't find terribly funny. At one point, both Kubert and the writer Chip Zdarsky randomly have like these dating advice tips in these panels. I don't know. It's kind of funny, especially now that I say it out loud, but like at the time it was a little cringy, we'll say. But regardless, it's a great comic. It's a solid step in the right direction, and it ends with one bombshell of a revelation. Now, my instinct is that this is some sort of trickery. There's a clone involved, there's some sort of shenanigans with like brainwashing for like this woman or something like that. I don't immediately jump to Peter Parker having secretly had a sister all along. But I think that's part of why they had the origin stuff in the beginning, reminding us of Spider-Man's story and that we don't necessarily know everything about Peter's parents. Now, it is unlikely that like Aunt May didn't know about this extra kid because she has never mentioned it up until now. It's a little bit of a stretch, to say the least, after all this time that she surfaces now. But it's an interesting twist. I'd be up for it. Her name's Teresa. She kind of looks like Peter. Johnny like immediately is attracted to her, of course. And I don't know. I find it interesting. I really want to see where they go from here. And that's a great way to start a first issue. As a #1 comic, like starting a new series and bringing a second series focusing on like the mainstream Peter Parker into publication, this does a really good job. And compared to like the stuff we're getting out of Amazing Spider-Man, I really do prefer this. It kind of unloads so much of Dan Slott's baggage, and it ends up being a really good comic. So yeah, I highly recommend it. I'm not sure what everyone's going to think about Peter Parker potentially having a sister, so let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. And just what you think of the comic in general. Otherwise, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to support Comic Island, you can check out our Patreon page in the video description below. Otherwise, don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.